It was the start of the semifinals, and already I was running late. Archer had me scraping crap off the grill of his brand new top-of-the-line Ietons Model LS air car. When I was done, I rushed to my racer, which was completely different than Archer's new transport. Where Archer's air car was built for comfort, my racer was built purely for speed. Though both of them had shields, the air car shield was fully anti-kinetic and able to block all incoming objects and magic. The racer's shields weren't that sophisticated. It should have been, given how dangerous the races were. I slipped into the driver's seat of the racer, slamming my finger on the main switch to prime the magical prisms. As soon as they kicked to life, the holographics appeared at the front of the racer, created by a magical spell powered by the prisms that allowed me to control the vehicle. Turning over my left shoulder, I slipped my left hand into a holographic spell control behind me and pressed it to start the grav pod underneath the racer. It took a few seconds to heat up, but when the light humming buzzed to life, I knew I was in business. My eyes quickly scanned all the holo controls. The magic spheres powering the crappy shields were up and running, and the grav pod shot a small burst of energy that lifted the entire racer a few feet off the ground. Content everything was fine, I quickly slid my finger along the main holograph spell centered in front of me that powered up the magic-infused cylinders in the back of the racer. The cylinders my racer had were old and far slower than others, which meant they took longer for the magic to start firing up. Eventually, when they did, the cylinders would begin shooting a series of spelled bursts as thrust, which would allow the racer to move. "Come on," I muttered. I should have started them several minutes ago, but instead I got stuck doing Archer's crap. All the other competitors were already doing their pre-flights. Cursing, I used my left hand to control the grav pod and lift the racer higher in the air. As soon as I was high enough, I checked the magical levels in the cylinders. It was in the yellow, rising toward the red. It needed to be in the red, but that would have to be good enough. I punched the main holo spell control and the cylinders lurched as the racer finally accelerated. Grabbing the holo spell control stick, I jerked it backward to tilt the racer upward as it continued forward to where the pre-flights were taking place. I double-checked all the holo spell controls. Once I was sure everything was up and running all right, I started doing my pre-flights. The announcer called for us to line up at the starting line, but I had just barely finished running a small warm-up lap. I lined up beside the other racers. The orbed lights began clicking down, and I clenched the holo spell control tighter, breathing deeply. Everything was calm, perfectly still. The orbed lights clicked on, one by one from purple to green to blue, every second going by like an hour. The final light clicked on bright silver, and then we were off. The sound was deafening as all the magical cylinders burst to life at once. My ears rang, but I had done this so many times I was used to it, familiar with it. My eyes darted back and forth, looking all around me, including above and below me. I shifted the grav pod so that I was a little lower, and then glanced above me, checking to see how many racers were up there. We had left the main stands a second ago, and most of the racers, including mine, were following the main track through the middle of the forest. Air cars followed us, with people using spell scrolls to capture our movements in a picture for the audience to watch back at the stands. I returned to facing forward, paying attention to the path ahead and where I needed to go. So far, everything was open, so I slammed the holo spell control forward, accelerating. There were 4 other racers around the same level I was that I could count. Most of them bashed each other, desperate to get a split-second advantage. One racer, which was to my left, knocked his racer against mine. My teeth clacked together from the force, almost biting my tongue off. I pushed off and turned the holo spell control to the left, tilting my racer and sliding it underneath his. With a sudden movement, I jerked backward and to the right, forcing his racer upward. The maneuver caused his racer to flip into the air and catch a tree limb. His racer erupted in a sea of debris that flew in a wild burst like hail. I smiled as the surge of adrenaline pounded its way through my veins. Another Ietons was hurt, hopefully choking on dirt and grass. The thought made me feel pure ecstasy. I hated them. All of them. Pressing my lips together in a firm line, I pushed the holo spell control forward. The movement accelerated the racer even faster and brought me directly behind another contestant. I raised the grav pod so I was higher than him, and then slammed the grav pod all the way down. My racer landed on top of his, which drove his into the ground. A huge cloud of dust and debris flew into the air as his racer tumbled across the track. Glancing at the holographic map on my right, I searched for the nearest racer. 3 of them were directly ahead of me, not including the leaders, but were coming up to a very tight left turn. Backing off the holo spell control and curving to the left around the corner, I was met by a fiery explosion. On pure instinct, I grabbed the grav pod controls and pulled straight up, barely missing all the fire and debris. Rechecking my map, I sighed in relief. There was only one racer ahead of me now. That was close. I grinned and set my sights on the remaining racer. As I pulled up next to him, he bashed me. Gritting my teeth, I jerked my racer to bash his right back. Up ahead, there was a log lying on the forest floor. Smiling as I got an idea, I accelerated ahead of him, aiming for the log. I shifted the power of the front magical sphere to the one on the far left side and dipped underneath the log so I could get the left side under it. Then I rose upward, flipping it into the air, which hit the racer behind me, square in the middle of his transparent view screen. Now to catch up to the leaders. Right before the finish line, there was a huge cliff that everyone had to slow down for in order to navigate it safely. If I slowed down and followed the valley downward with the others, I would never be able to win, so I decided to do something really risky. Or really stupid, depending on whether it worked or not. I pushed the hollow spell control to the max. As I got closer to the edge of the cliff, I started slowly lowering the grav pod until I was just barely skimming the grass. My timing would have to be absolutely perfect. I waited until right at the very edge, and then I slammed the grav pod to full power. Yeah, I was going to jump the cliff, rather than go down into the valley below like the other leaders. As my racer shot up into the air and reached the limit of the grav pod's operation maximum, I quickly shut it down and routed all that magic energy straight to the cylinders. The cylinders exploded with bursts of magic energy, shooting my racer forward across the valley. In order to cross the entire valley, instead of losing power and crashing, I needed as much airtime as I could get. So I turned the hollow spell control stick to the right, putting me in a very tight spin. The spiral would not only stabilize the racer and keep me on course, but it would extend the flight, hopefully allowing my racer to reach the other side. I shut down the magical sphere powering the forward shield, since I wouldn't need it, and rerouted that magic energy to the cylinders as well. The cylinders' magic energy started climbing toward the limit. If the cylinders maxed out, they would cause the entire racer to explode, so I hoped they would hold out. I reached the peak of my arc and started to come back down. The closer I came to the ground, the more I accelerated, pushing well past the maximum possible speed of my racer. On the far side of the valley below the cliff, there was a short hill that led down to the finish line. If my calculations were right, I would come just over the hill and be able to use it to slow myself down instead of making a crater in the ground. Or I would be dead. Nauseous from all the spinning, I still managed to count down in my head to the time when I would need to level out the racer. With a hard left lurch and pulling back on the stick, I brought the racer level, barely 50 feet off the top of the hill. I powered back on the grav pod and shoved its power to the maximum. A heavy vibration settled in underneath me as it started to catch and slow my fall. It wasn't quite enough. I slammed into the ground on the other side of the hill, but fortunately not hard enough to seriously damage anything. Dirt and grass flew out behind me, but I managed to correct it enough to sprint for the finish line. I had left most of the racers in the valley behind me, and fortunately only 2 leaders were ahead of me. In an instant, I caught up and passed the leaders. As I flew by them, I felt a lurch on my vehicle. I looked at the holographic speedometer to see it dropping massively. One of the 2 racers was using his telekinetic power to pull my racer backward while simultaneously pulling his forward. The finish line was just yards away, but I wouldn't make it. His racer passed half a length ahead of mine across the finish line. I cursed. I did all of that crap to risk my life in order to win, and then a blasted Ieton ended up winning in the end. All because of his superpower. I slammed my fist against the side of the racer in frustration, cursing furiously. Archer would be livid. As my owner, he'd put more into the race than anyone, and this loss would look bad on him, especially with all the betting. No doubt I'd be punished for his loss later. If he would just let another Ieton race, he'd at least have an equal advantage. But no, he had to risk my life, forcing me to compete against people who were genetically superior to me. The other racers all came in as I headed to the winner's circle in second place. As we lined up to get our pictures taken, I shut down the grav pod and the magical cylinders and jumped out of the racer to stand beside it. While the people used the spell scrolls to take our pictures, the sponsors strolled across the arena toward us, and there in the back of them was Archer. Sighing, I prepared for the lashing of a lifetime. I wished I had died in the crash rather than face Archer's wrath. At least it would have been quick.